Roy Orbison's voice was me. And he had the ability to become you as the listener. And you were able to...
The point comes when young ladies look at you, but they're actually looking over your shoulder.
Since I've had the opportunity to go on stage, so the band is wonderful, and we're always looking to do another gig.
When Barry Gibb first heard Roy Orbison sing, the world seemed to pause. He was still a teenager, huddled over a small radio in Australia, when crying came through the static. The moment the first note rose, Barry felt something shift inside him. That, he would later say, was the voice of God. It wasn't just admiration, it was revelation. Orbison's voice reached places most singers couldn't even imagine, gliding between power and heartbreak with the ease of a prayer. From that night on, Barry's idea of what music could be changed forever. If you love stories about music legends and the connections that shaped history, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales from the world of music. As the years went by and the Bee Gees began to rise, Barry carried that sound like a secret blueprint. He studied how Orbison built tension, how he held silence, how every word seemed to ache. The Bee Gees' harmonies may have been rooted in family, but their emotional core owed something to Roy Orbison's vulnerability. Barry later admitted that whenever he struggled to find the right note, he'd ask himself, what would Roy do? The answer usually led him deeper into emotion, away from perfection, and closer to truth. In the glossy world of disco and pop, where image often outshined substance, Barry kept Roy's spirit close. He never forgot how Orbison could sound both strong and fragile in the same breath. Even in Bee Gees hits like How Deep Is Your Love and To Love Somebody, you can hear that influence. Soft falsetto shaped by a man who once believed heartbreak could be holy. It's no coincidence that Barry's ballads carried the same ache that made Roy's songs timeless. But behind the admiration was something deeper, almost haunting. Barry once confessed that every time he heard Only the Lonely, he felt like the song was speaking directly to him. Maybe it reminded him of the sacrifices fame demanded. Maybe it echoed the losses he'd endured. Brothers gone too soon, friendships fractured under the weight of success. Whatever it was, the connection never faded. Even decades later, when Barry performed alone on quiet stages, he'd close his eyes and imagine that voice again, echoing in the background, guiding him like a ghostly mentor. To the world, Roy Orbison was a legend of the past. To Barry Gibb, he was a presence that never left, and as Barry reached his 70s, that presence only grew stronger. He began to speak about Roy not just as an influence, but as a companion, an invisible figure woven through the melodies of his own life. Some fans say that when Barry sings today, you can still hear it, a faint trace of Orbison's tone, a reminder that one man's voice can live on inside another. Before Barry Gibb ever dreamed of topping charts, Roy Orbison had already changed the meaning of a song. In a time when most singers followed the same formula, 2 verses, a chorus, a smile for the cameras, Roy did something unthinkable. He stripped it all away. He sang about loneliness, heartbreak, and loss without ever flinching. His voice didn't just carry pain, it seemed to live inside it. Critics would later call his range operatic, but to Roy, it was simply honesty. He didn't need to move or dance or flash a grin. He just stood there, motionless, with dark glasses and a trembling microphone, and somehow made the whole world feel his heartbreak. Born in Texas in 1936, Roy's life was defined by contrast. Fame and tragedy, triumph and grief. He wasn't built like a rock star. He was shy, quiet, almost painfully humble. But when he opened his mouth, the shy man disappeared. That soaring, trembling tenor could cut through any room. Songs like Crying, Only the Lonely, and In Dreams weren't just hits, they were emotional earthquakes. He sang as though every word might be his last confession. For many, that vulnerability became addictive. Even Elvis Presley, at the height of his fame, once said Roy had the most perfect voice in the world. But behind the success was an undercurrent of pain that no award could fix. Roy's personal life was marked by heartbreak few could endure. He lost his wife Claudette in a motorcycle accident, then 2 of his sons in a fire. Yet somehow he returned to the stage, broken but unbowed, and sang like a man possessed by grief. Every performance felt like resurrection. He turned his pain into melody and his losses into legacy. It's no wonder Barry Gibb, an artist who would later lose his own brothers, found something eternal in Orbison's music. In Roy, Barry saw not just a singer, but a man who carried pain with grace. What made Roy truly stand apart was his refusal to conform. At a time when the Beatles and Rolling Stones were rewriting pop, he stayed true to the sound that made him who he was. His songs didn't chase trends, they defied them. His voice climbed scales most singers wouldn't even attempt, and in doing so, he carved out a style that felt almost supernatural. He could whisper and wail in the same verse, turning sorrow into something beautiful. That power left a mark on everyone who heard it, from young dreamers like Barry Gibb to seasoned legends who wondered how he did it. As the years passed, Roy's fame faded, but his legend didn't. In the 1980s, a new generation rediscovered him through the Traveling Wilburys, a supergroup with Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. It was proof that greatness never truly disappears. It just waits for the world to catch up. For Barry Gibb, who was already a global icon by then, seeing Roy return to the spotlight must have felt like destiny coming full circle. The man who once inspired him was once again standing where he belonged, at the center of music's soul. For decades, Barry Gibb carried Roy Orbison's voice like a ghost in his head, a distant idol he thought he'd never meet. But in the music world, fate has a strange sense of timing. By the late 1970s, Barry had gone from being a kid in Brisbane dreaming of stardom to a global phenomenon. The Bee Gees dominated charts across continents, writing songs that defined an era. Yet even in their biggest moments, Barry never forgot the man who taught him that emotion mattered more than rhythm. So when he finally met Roy Orbison, it wasn't just a meeting, it was a moment of quiet reverence. It happened in the kind of setting only the music industry can create. Late-night sessions, industry events, and mutual friends weaving connections between legends. When Barry finally came face-to-face with Roy, he wasn't the confident frontman the world knew. He was a fan again. Roy, soft-spoken and gracious as always, immediately put him at ease. The two men shared a mutual respect that transcended fame. Roy admired the Bee Gees' songwriting discipline, and Barry couldn't stop talking about the emotion Roy poured into every syllable. Those who were there said their conversation wasn't filled with ego or showbiz talk. It was about tone, feeling, and the burden of carrying music that meant too much. What struck Barry most was how humble Roy remained despite everything he'd lived through. Here was a man who had stood beside Elvis, outlasted trends, and still treated everyone like an equal. To Barry, that humility was the final lesson Roy had to offer. You could have everything, the awards, the fame, the wealth, but if you lost your soul, your music would lose its truth. That idea lingered with Barry long after the meeting ended. There are whispers that their conversation went beyond admiration, that they spoke about writing together, perhaps even trading melodic ideas. Some fans claim Barry offered Roy one of his unrecorded ballads, a song meant to capture that haunting Orbison tone. Whether that collaboration ever materialized remains uncertain. What's known is that a few years later, Roy recorded Words, a Bee Gees composition, on his album Milestones. It wasn't just a tribute, it was proof that their artistic worlds had finally intertwined. For Barry, hearing Roy's voice sing a song he had written was surreal. It was as if the circle had closed, the student and teacher united in melody. And for Roy, it was a reminder that his influence had stretched far beyond the rock and roll era, that even in a disco-driven world, his sound still had a heartbeat. The song didn't become a global hit, but it didn't need to. For both men, it was symbolic, an invisible handshake between generations of emotional storytellers. Years later, Barry would look back on that encounter with quiet gratitude. He'd say that meeting Roy was like finally getting to thank a man who shaped his soul. And though they never became constant collaborators, that one moment seemed to seal something between them, an unspoken recognition that they were part of the same lineage. When Roy passed away in 1988, Barry felt the loss deeply. He said it was like losing the compass that had guided him through music. But the truth was, Roy had already left something behind, a fragment of his spirit carried in every song Barry would write afterward. When two great voices collide, it doesn't always happen in a duet. Sometimes the connection hides in a line of lyrics, a chord change, or a song title you'd never think twice about. That was the case with Barry Gibb and Roy Orbison. Their friendship may have been quiet, but their creative fingerprints touched the same songs in ways most fans never realized. One of the most overlooked moments in both of their careers came in 1973, when Roy released his album Milestones. Tucked away on that record was a track called Words, written by Barry and his brothers. For the Bee Gees, it was already a hit, but for Roy, it became something deeper. A chance to interpret the Gibb brothers' songwriting through the lens of his own pain. Hearing Roy Orbison's trembling voice sing "Smile, an Everlasting Smile, a smile can bring you near to me," was like hearing Barry's emotions reflected back at him through another soul. The Bee Gees' version was tender, but Roy's rendition was raw, slower, more vulnerable, as if he were speaking from the edge of heartbreak itself. When Barry later talked about the song, he said it was one of the proudest moments of his writing career. For him, having Roy record a Bee Gees song was like getting the ultimate nod from the man who'd inspired his musical DNA. That small collaboration may not have made headlines, but within the industry, it carried quiet weight. It was proof that Barry's songwriting had reached the level of his idols. Orbison wasn't someone who casually covered other artists' material. He chose songs that spoke to him. The fact that he chose words said everything about the connection between them. In many ways, that recording felt like a musical handshake between two eras, the poetic balladry of the 60s meeting the harmony-driven storytelling of the 70s. But some believe their creative exchange didn't stop there. Music historians have long pointed out similarities between Orbison's later vocal phrasing and the Bee Gees' evolving style. After Milestones, Roy experimented with higher registers, layered harmonies, and dramatic builds that echoed Barry's techniques. Meanwhile, Barry began using orchestral sweeps and emotional climaxes reminiscent of Roy's classic ballads. Whether they consciously borrowed from one another or simply shared the same emotional frequency, their styles began to blend like parallel rivers meeting in the distance. Behind closed doors, there were rumors of unfinished projects, songs discussed, melodies exchanged, but never officially recorded. Barry's studio notebooks from the late 70s reportedly mention Roy-style compositions, shorthand for songs meant to capture that haunting depth. One insider claimed Barry once considered producing an album for Roy in the early 80s, though scheduling and label politics got in the way. Nothing came of it publicly, but fans still speculate about lost tapes or unreleased demos buried somewhere in record company vaults. Even without those mythical sessions, the respect between them was visible. Barry often mentioned Roy when asked about his heroes, grouping him with Elvis and the Beatles as one of the untouchables. And when Roy made his big comeback in the late 80s with the Traveling Wilburys, Barry was among the first to publicly celebrate it. He saw it not as a rival's return, but as a victory for real emotion in an industry that had grown too synthetic. For all the admiration that Barry Gibb showed Roy Orbison, there were parts of their story that never made it into interviews or liner notes. Some say it was because Barry is a private man by nature. Others believe it's because certain truths were simply too personal to explain. Over the years, stories began to circulate about long late-night phone calls, uncredited songwriting help, and even emotional confessions exchanged between two men who understood loneliness better than most. None of these accounts have ever been fully confirmed, but they've lingered in fan circles like smoke that refuses to clear. One rumor claimed that after Roy's career hit a lull in the 1970s, Barry reached out quietly, offering to write or produce something for him under another name. Supposedly, Barry didn't want to take credit. He just wanted Roy's voice to be heard again. While there's no documentation of those sessions, it fits with Barry's personality. He was known for helping artists behind the scenes, giving away songs, rearranging tracks, or rewriting lyrics just to get them right for someone else. And Roy, always humble and cautious, might have accepted that help without ever making it public. Another story suggested that Roy's haunting comeback energy in the 1980s, especially during the Traveling Wilburys era, was partly sparked by a conversation with Barry years earlier. According to this account, Barry told him, "You don't chase the sound chases you." It's a phrase Barry has said in interviews before, and it's possible he shared it with Roy. Because by the mid-80s, when Orbison returned with You Got It and Handle with Care, his voice sounded reborn, older, wiser, but just as powerful. Fans like to think Barry's words played a small role in that revival, even if only as encouragement from one artist to another. Then there were the darker whispers, the kind that come from insiders who love to talk in half-truths. Some claimed Roy had confided in Barry about his exhaustion, about how fame felt hollow after so much loss. Others suggested Barry saw in Roy a warning of what happens when talent is burdened by tragedy. After all, Barry would later endure his own series of heartbreaks, the deaths of Maurice, Robin, and Andy, each one carving deeper into him. Some fans even believe Barry's song alone carries emotional echoes of Roy's despair, as if he was writing through the voice of the man he once idolized. Barry, of course, has never confirmed any of it. He's careful when he talks about other artists, especially those he's lost. But every now and then, he'll let something slip. In one interview, he said that Roy was as fragile as his songs, but that's what made him special. That one line has fueled years of speculation. It suggests Barry didn't just see Orbison as a hero. He saw the pain behind the perfection, the cost of being that vulnerable on stage. There's also a long-standing rumor that Barry kept one of Roy's handwritten notes, a small piece of paper with a lyric idea on it, framed in his home studio. No one outside his family has ever seen it, but it wouldn't be surprising. Barry has always been sentimental about the artists who shaped him, keeping little reminders of them close by. To him, those objects aren't memorabilia, they're talismans, proof that art can connect people across decades. As Barry Gibb grew older, his reflections on music began to sound less like interviews and more like confessions. Decades after his first encounter with Roy Orbison's voice, he still spoke about him as if he'd only just heard that song yesterday. The awe never left. In one conversation, Barry admitted that he used to close his eyes while recording and imagine what Roy would do with the melody, how he'd hold a note just long enough to make your chest tighten. For Barry, that became the ultimate measure of honesty. If it didn't make you feel something, it wasn't worth singing. By the time Barry reached his late 70s, many of the people who had built his world were gone. His brothers, his parents, his musical peers. The noise of fame had quieted, leaving him face to face with his memories. And in that silence, Roy Orbison's influence seemed louder than ever. He described Roy's music as spiritual without trying to be, a kind of emotional truth that couldn't be manufactured. Barry's words carried the weight of someone who understood that kind of loss all too well. Both men had seen their families shattered by tragedy, and both had kept singing through it. In several interviews, Barry's tone would change when Roy's name came up. He'd go from animated to quiet, as if stepping into sacred ground. He once said, "Roy's voice didn't just fill a room, it filled something in you." That statement summed up what made their connection so enduring. It wasn't about fame, chart positions, or awards. It was about emotion, raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. Those who've been around Barry in his later years say that he often revisits Roy's songs privately. When alone in his studio, he'll play In Dreams or Crying, letting the sound drift through the room. One engineer recalled Barry pausing mid-session, staring at the console and whispering, "No one sings like that anymore." It wasn't nostalgia, it was longing. A quiet acknowledgement that some artistry belongs to another era, and that his own music was a reflection of a man who taught him how to feel without fear. Fans noticed subtle tributes, too. When Barry performed stripped-down acoustic versions of Bee Gees classics in recent years, his phrasing often mirrored Roy's. The delicate hesitations, the trembling intensity, the haunting falsetto. Even the way he ended certain songs, fading into breath rather than power, felt like a nod to his old hero. Some critics have called Barry's late performances haunted in the most beautiful way. Maybe that's because every note carries the echo of someone who taught him that pain can be melodic. There's also something poetic in how their stories mirror each other. Roy's career was marked by triumphs and devastating losses, and so was Barry's. Both became symbols of resilience, men who kept creating even when life kept breaking them down. Barry once said, "When you've lost everyone who made you who you are, the only thing left is the music." And perhaps that's why Roy still feels so present to him. It isn't just memory, it's continuation. To this day, Barry keeps a framed photo of Roy in his Miami home. He's mentioned it in passing, saying it reminds him of why he started. For a man whose own voice defined an era, it's telling that he still bows in spirit to another. Because in Barry's mind, there are singers and then there was Roy Orbison. Time has a way of revealing what really lasts. Trends disappear, fame fades, and even legends are eventually replaced by new names. But the connection between Barry Gibb and Roy Orbison has never faded. It's become part of the foundation of modern music. You can hear it in every artist who dares to sing with vulnerability, who lets emotion bleed through perfection. Both men taught the world that real power doesn't come from how loud you sing, but from how much truth you let out. And that lesson has outlived them both. When young musicians talk about inspiration today, most mention artists they've never met. But when Barry talks about Roy, it feels personal, as if he still carries their last conversation somewhere in his heart. It's that emotional continuity that makes their story so rare. Roy may have left this world in 1988, but his voice still lingers in Barry's songs, in his phrasing, and even in the silences between his words. There's a certain tone Barry uses when he sings now, fragile, reflective, slightly trembling, that feels like an unspoken duet with a ghost. Their legacies also intertwine in how they treated music itself. Neither man ever saw it as a business first. To them, songs were living things, extensions of the soul. Roy once said, "If you sing about love, you'd better mean it." Barry lived by that rule too. Whether writing "How Deep Is Your Love" or "To Love Somebody," he never performed as an entertainer trying to please a crowd. He performed as a man trying to understand his own emotions, and that truth is what keeps their music alive decades later. It's easy to forget that both artists started from small beginnings. One in Texas, the other in Australia, worlds apart, yet shaped by the same loneliness and hunger for expression. Both lost more than most people could survive, yet both turned grief into art. And maybe that's why their bond runs deeper than collaboration. They weren't just musicians, they were survivors who learned how to turn heartbreak into harmony. Their pain became universal, their songs eternal. Today, when Barry steps onto a stage, the cheers fade quickly, but the silence afterward, that's where the magic happens. In those few seconds before he begins, when the room holds its breath, it's as if Roy is there again. Maybe not in body, but in spirit, in the space between the chords, in the breath before the first note. The influence isn't something Barry talks about much anymore. It's something he lives. Because how do you put into words what another man's voice gave your life? For fans, their connection remains one of the quiet marvels of music history. Not loud or scandalous, but pure. A bridge between eras, between rock's golden age and the emotional storytelling that came after. For Barry, it's proof that admiration can evolve into something sacred. And for Roy, even in death, it's proof that the right voice never really disappears. It just finds a new place to live. Maybe that's the real story here. Not just a friendship or a collaboration, but an inheritance. One man passing his emotional torch to another, who carried it forward into the next century. Barry Gibb may have spent a lifetime chasing new melodies, but deep down, part of him still sings with Roy Orbison. And if you listen closely enough, you can hear them both. Two voices, decades apart, still echoing in perfect harmony. What do you think? Was it admiration, destiny, or something deeper that bound these two legends together? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more fascinating music history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story about the legends who shaped the soundtrack of our lives.